we finally got another male character in Genshin, and he's called Aoife, so we'll look at and understand everything about his kit. As for Aoife himself, he's going to be a 4-star catalyst character, and for his kit, he's mainly an anemo grouper who can heal as well as buff electro charge damage, so overall he has a pretty decent kit. Now before starting with his kit, if you're planning to get him or someone else like Skirk and have been saving and planning to buy Welkins or doing other in-game purchases for them, then you can do that and save money while doing it through LD Shop. LD Shop offers everything that's offered in-game at a much cheaper rate. As for the website itself, it's highly rated on websites like Trustpilot and is being used by tons of players worldwide daily. All you have to do is select the pack you want, enter your in-game details, set up your payment method, and you're done. The website can also be used not only for Genshin, but for lots of other games as well, so try it out from the link in the pinned comment or the description. Starting off with his Ascension, he gets Elemental Mastery with his Ascension, gaining a total of 96 Elemental Mastery at level 90. His normal and charged attacks aren't anything special at all, so we can ignore those. Still, for reference, this is what his normal attacks look like, and this is what his charged attack looks like. Going to his skill, it's pretty simple and somewhat similar to Chaska, so right after clicking it, he'll gain 80 Night Soul points and start riding a baby Kukasaurus. Along with these, his skill will react differently to whether you tap or hold his normal attacks. As for the modes themselves, they don't have any crazy differences, just some minor changes, so tapping normal attacks will make Aoife hit the enemies, and every hit he does will heal the entire party based on his elemental mastery, and if you hold his normal attack instead, he'll still hit, and every hit will heal the same amount as well. So then what's the difference? The difference is probably the speed of the hits, so he hits a total of 11 times by tapping and 12 times by holding. So whenever you use his skill, you'd want to use the hold mode of his skill, as it's more efficient. On an extra side note, as for the healing ability of Aoife, I'd suggest you to not rely on it, because if we take an average build as our example, with Aoife having 900 elemental mastery at talent level 9, he'd heal around 407 HP per hit, and a total of around 4.8k HP in 12 hits. Now it's not bad at all, it's just that it's kinda slow, since you gotta wait for Aoife to hit all 12 shots first. Now looking at his burst, it's pretty good for grouping enemies together. However, as for the grouping, it's not as good as someone like Vendi or Sucrose, but it works. So after using his burst, he shoots a shell towards the enemy, which explodes after hitting, and it'll pull all nearby opponents towards that point for a while, dealing AoE anemo damage. This is quite similar to Sucrose's burst. Furthermore, if the shell hits an opponent who's affected by either Hydro, Pyro, Cryo, or Electro, it will explode once again, dealing additional AoE damage aligned with the respective element. So overall, how you'd want to use Aoife in a team is to keep using your main character until his burst gets filled, and once it's filled, you can carry out your usual rotation. For example, maybe using Aoife's burst, then some other support's burst, then switching to your main DPS to deal all the damage. Now that that's done, let's look at all his multipliers. Furthermore, as for his talent leveling priority, you'd want to level up his elemental burst first, then his elemental skill, and lastly his normal attacks. Moving to Aoife's passives, his first passive allows him to buff all nearby party members' swirl and electro charge damage. So every 1 Night Soul point out of the total in your party will grant him 1 point of a buff. He can have up to a maximum of 150 points, and what these points do is that every point will increase all swirl and electro charge damage dealt by around 1%. So if you get up to 150 points, you'll have an 150% swirl and electro charge damage bonus. Also, something about the points, since it's 150, you need to have a total of 150 Night Soul points in your party. So generally the best recommendation would be to run Aoife along with another Natlon character, but it's totally fine if you run him solo as well. His second passive just increases his elemental mastery by 80 for 10 seconds every time a party member triggers Night Soul burst. His third passive just discusses the Night Soul transmission, and the last passive says that Aoife will consume 10 phlogiston and heal an active party member or a Saurian that has less than 40% HP. This healing will be based on 150% of Aoife's elemental mastery and can be triggered once every 10 seconds. As usual, it doesn't work in domains or the Spiral Abyss. So now that we understand his kit, all of it might be a lot to take in. So let's recap the things in short before moving on to other stuff. This is Aoife. He's mainly meant to be played as an off-field character. His skill had 2 modes, tap and hold. Both of them did the same thing, however hold mode healed better, and his burst groups enemies together together. His first passive allowed him to buff swirl and electro-charged reaction damage. The second passive increased his elemental mastery. The third passive was just about Night Soul transmission, and the last passive allowed him to perform off-field heals. Talking about his builds, starting off with weapons, you mainly want weapons that give both attack and elemental mastery. So some examples for 5-star catalysts will be Sunny Morning and Nahida's signature 1000 Floating Dreams. They both give really high base attack as well as lots of elemental mastery as well, so they are his best in slot. If you don't have those and want some alternate 4-star options for him, then you could use Mappa Mare, as it gives both attack and elemental mastery. If not this, then you could use Favonius Codex, as it gives lots of energy recharge, which is beneficial for Aoife, as you can get his bursts up a lot quicker. You can also use the Sacrificial Fragments, since it gives elemental mastery. Alternatively, you can also go with Fruit of Fulfillment, since it gives attack, elemental mastery, as well as energy recharge. So this could be a solid all-rounder choice. Lastly, you can also use the Hakushin, as it gives energy recharge, or skip this and use the Widsith. Now the Widsith is somewhat of a gamble since it can give one of 3 different buffs, but since all of them favor Aoife, it's not too bad. Looking at his artifacts, since he's an anemo support, you'd want to run him with Viridescent Veneerer, as it's going to be his best in slot. As for the stats on the artifact, since his healing and reaction scales of elemental mastery, we have to focus on that. His burst damage doesn't really matter, so we can ignore attack and go with triple EM. So for Sands, you'd want elemental mastery, for Goblet you'd want elemental mastery as well, and lastly for Circlet you'd want elemental mastery again. As for the substat, focus on around 160 to 170% ER, attack percent, flat attack, and crit. Now as for Aoife's team comps, some examples will be you can use me, Ayato, Ororon, and Aoife, or you can replace Ororon with Fischl and Ayato with someone like Neuvillette, or maybe replace Fischl with Keqing and Neuvillette with Xingqiu. And this is generally how you'd want to form his teams. Just have Aoife, an Electro or Hydro DPS, along with other Electro or Hydro supports. Now going to his constellations, his first constellation just restores energy, as whenever an opponent is hit by Aoife when he's using his skill, it'll restore 6 energy for Aoife. This can only be triggered once every 8 seconds. C2 improves his swirl and electrocharge damage buff, as now Aoife provides a damage bonus of 200% on swirl and electrocharge damage, as his buff points limit has been increased to 200. Not only that, but now every Night Soul point you have in your team above 60 will give Aoife 4 buff points instead of 1. So to reach the max buff provided by his C2, you'd need 95 Night Soul points in your team. C3 just increases his skill level by 3. C4 improves his burst, as now the AoE suction field lasts for 3 extra seconds, and additionally, Aoife gains 100 elemental mastery after using his burst. C5 just increases the level of his burst by 3. Finally, C6 tries to improve his DPS capabilities, as now when you use the hold version of his skill, there's a 50% chance of him firing an additional projectile that deals 120% of its original damage. Additionally, when Aoife isn't in combat, he'll consume 20% less Night Soul points and phlogiston. Lastly, as for his constellation, his best constellation is going to be C2, followed by C1. Now that we covered everything about him, for some final thoughts, Aoife is a decent anemo support who can perform heals, group enemies, and buff the swirl and electrocharged reactions. His kit is easy to build and requires very little investment. However, for drawbacks, his grouping isn't best, being easily replaceable by someone like Sucrose, and his ability to buff electrocharged comps only limit his team comps as well. Still, despite these drawbacks, Aoife is a fun and unique character. He may not be a top meta pick, but he's definitely a worthwhile addition for players looking for a fresh support option.